So good afternoon, everyone, and thank you for joining the Reliability Coordinator West Oversight Committee meeting. My name is Christina Osborne. I work in Stakeholder Affairs. I'll be facilitating the meeting. So we are recording today's session. We're going to make that available out on the RC Oversight Committee webpage. You can find that on the RC webpage. And also, we did post a presentation that we're going to go over today. It is also out on the Oversight Committee webpage. So look for it there, or you can also access it through the public calendar. So this is the agenda for the next 2 hours. We have quite a few things to go over. So after I finish up, I'm going to turn it over to Michelle Cathcart, who is the chair of the committee, and she's going to conduct roll call. And also, then we have Jordan White, Jordan White here. He's from the Western Interconnection Regional Advisory Body, also known as YRAB. He's going to go over the role of the liaison and also talk about general matters of interest of YRAB. Also, just to let you know, we have committee members logged in or dialed into the speaker line. If you could manually mute your phone so we don't get any background noise, that would be great. Thank you very much. And if you do want to speak, you're welcome to unmute your line, but just during the discussion, it would be helpful if you can manually mute your phone. And so after Jordan, we have Tim Beach from RC West. We also have Dee Dee Sabaki from the ISO. They're going to go over the items for the RC operations update. Janet Morris is going to join us. She's going to provide an update on technology. We have Ginger Quintavala from the ISO, who's going to provide an update on customer onboarding. April Gordon has joined us from the ISO. She's going to provide a briefing on billing estimates for 2020, and then Phil Pettengill, ISO, is going to provide a briefing on the executive statement of readiness for the July customers. And then we are going to have a committee discussion on the possible rejuvenation by WEC of its RC operating committee. Hopefully we have some folks on the phone from WEC and they can join in that discussion. And then we'll go over future agenda items, and we will have time at the end for public comment. So with that, I'll go ahead and turn it over to Michelle for roll call.
All right, thanks, Christina. All right, so do we have Arizona Electric Power Co-op? Avista? Avangrid?
Avangrid's here.
Arizona Public Service?
ATS is here.
Balancing Authority of Northern California? BPA is here. CAISO BA? Chelan? Anyone from Chelan? Douglas County?
Yes, Jeff Heminger from Douglas here.
Thanks, Jeff. Grant County? City and County of San Francisco, Hetch Hetchy?
Brian Pauling's here for Hetch Hetchy.
Thanks, Brian. Idaho Power?
Ben Brandt here for Idaho Power.
IID?
Matt Smeltzer, IID.
LADWP?
Glenn Berry is here from LA.
And also
Thanks.
Chris Lynn is here from LA.
Thanks, Chris. Los Alamos?
Los Alamos. Yep.
Modesto? Montana, Alberta Tie Line? Nat Turner?
Nat Turner's here, Michelle.
Northwestern?
Northwestern's here.
NV Energy? Pacificor?
Eric Brookhouse from Pacificor.
Thanks, Eric. Pacific Gas and Electric?
Tom French from PG&E.
Thanks, Tom. Portland General?
Corey McAllister from Portland General.
Public Service Company of New Mexico?
Manuel Sanchez from Public Service Company, New Mexico.
Thanks, Manuel. Puget Sound Energy?
Evan Sorrell's here from PG.
Salt River Project.
Steve Cobb's here.
Southern California Edison.
Gary Carpley.
Thanks, Gary. San Diego Gas and Electric. Seattle City Light.
Pablo Krupa, Seattle City Light.
Thanks, Paul. Silicon Valley. SMUD. Snohomish. Tacoma.
John Nuremberg here from Tacoma.
Transbay Cable. Tri-State.
This is Maud. I'm here. Thank you.
Thanks, Maud. Turlock.
Casey Hashimoto.
Thanks, Casey. Valley Electric.
Emily Frank is here with Valley Electric.
Thanks, Emily. And WAPA.
Christine Henry from WAPA, Sierra Nevada.
All right. Thank you. I guess with that, we will turn it over to Jordan White, our YRAB regulatory liaison.
Okay, perfect, thanks. Good afternoon, members of the Oversight Committee. My name is Jordan White, and I serve as a commissioner on the Utah Public Service Commission and also as chair of the Western EIM body of state regulators. But I'm here today in my capacity as the YRAB appointed regulatory liaison to RC West. YRAB worked closely with the CAISO and members of the Reliability Coordinator Project Steering Committee to formalize a role for YRAB within the governance of RC West. YRAB submitted advice to FERC supporting the rates, terms, and conditions established by CAISO when it filed at FERC. Because YRAB believed that the tariff changes and proposed oversight of the CAISO RC was in the public interest. An important part of that oversight is the role of the regulatory liaison appointed by the leadership of YRAB. I appreciate the opportunity to discuss some general perspectives of YRAB as it relates to RC services. The importance of YRAB is widely misunderstood, and I'd like to clarify who and what YRAB is and why entities like the Oversight Committee should assign significant weight to YRAB's advice on reliability matters within the Western Interconnection. Let me start by summarizing what most of you already know at this point. YRAB is the only regional advisory body in the United States established under Section 215J of the Federal Power Act. YRAB has statutory authority to provide advice to FERC, NERC, and WEC on bulk electric system reliability matters in the Western Interconnection. And because YRAB is organized interconnection-wide, FERC may give deference to the advice of YRAB. Beyond the weight of YRAB's statutory authority, it is even more significant that YRAB speaks with a united voice on behalf of all of the states and provinces within the Western Interconnection with respect to reliability matters. YRAB does not simply represent regulatory utility commissions that oversee investor-owned utilities in the Western Interconnection. While some of YRAB members are commissioners who regulate entities taking RC service, all YRAB members are appointed by their governors and premiers to represent the public interest of their respective states and provinces with respect to reliability in the Western Interconnection. In 2005, the Western Governors Association passed a policy resolution directing establishment of YRAB that reads in part, the creation of YRAB is necessary to ensure that the public interest is fully represented in the decisions on the reliability of the Western grid. It will help ensure that reliability standards implemented for the Western Interconnection reflect an appropriate balance between the benefits of a reliable grid and the cost of achieving reliability, costs that Western customers will bear. This is YRAB's mission and focus, to speak on behalf of 14 Western states, Mexico, and 2 Canadian provinces with a single common voice. I want to emphasize that YRAB works hard to achieve consensus among all of its states and provinces before weighing in and submitting advice. Instead of simply reporting majority and minority views, YRAB puts in the time and effort to arrive at a united position that represents the perspective of all members. For example, if a state or province objects to a specific recommendation, the recommendation is deleted if consensus cannot be reached. In my view, it's hard to find this type of united voice in the Western Interconnection, and that is what makes YRAB extremely unique. Now I'd like to talk about where YRAB plans to focus its efforts. YRAB cares about the strategic policy direction of the RC and encourages exceptional performance that goes above and beyond minimum NERC compliance with reliability standards. As such, YRAB's efforts will primarily focus on 3 main areas. First, RC governance that supports transparent and independent decision-making by the RC. Second, RC procedures that recognize the importance of interconnection-wide reliability and not just maintaining reliability for a single RC area footprint. And third, RC policies that are just, reasonable, not unduly discriminatory or preferential, and in the public interest. As a policy-making body, YRAB understands its role, and it does not care to involve itself in overseeing the operational decisions of the RC or the utilities, as long as those decisions are consistent with YRAB's efforts to ensure exceptional reliability performance. YRAB also recognizes the need for confidential sessions of the Oversight Committee, and it does not want to compromise critical infrastructure. When possible, YRAB believes confidential sessions should be recognized and summarized in order to maintain transparent and independent decision-making. Finally, I would like to suggest that in order to provide meaningful advice, YRAB must have adequate information and details to ensure that RC policies are consistent with exceptional reliability performance. To be well informed, YRAB utilizes technical engineering staff like Eric Barron, who's actually here with me today, who's part of YRAB's staff. In other words, smart people like Eric can dive into the details and translate highly technical information for a dumb lawyer like me. And that's why he is extremely valuable to providing information and translating to the policymakers and regulators who comprise the majority of those folks who sit on the YRAB board. As such, I encourage the Oversight Committee and CAISO to provide the greatest practical access to YRAB staff to ensure the most informed advice. I appreciate your time today, and I look forward to a productive and collaborative relationship among the Oversight Committee, CAISO staff, and YRAB. I'm happy to take any questions if there are any from the Oversight Committee. Thank you for your time.
I have another question for you, actually, Jordan.
Yeah.
Do you or YRAB have a similar role with other RCs in the West?
That's under discussion right now. We don't as of yet, but that's something that we will certainly explore. I mean, the purview of YRAB's mission is certainly interconnection-wide, and as I think that further RCs develop and move forward, that's something to probably consider and probably makes sense.
Thanks, Jordan. At this time, we'll turn it over to Tim Beach.
So thank you very much. I just wanted to give you a quick update on operations of what we've seen so far and some of our activities progressing towards the November 1st footprint. So shadow operations started May 1st. We're in our 21st day now. For those that don't know, we've had RCs on shift 24/7, mirroring what Peak is doing. We work quite a bit with Peak on the logistics of shadow operations, and really we're in a listening mode right now for the first 30 days. So the Peak RC will talk to the BAs and TOPs. They'll conference us in a listening mode, and then we'll have a discussion afterwards if we have any questions. So that's been going very well. We've been included in almost all their calls. We were a little concerned about if they were too busy, if we wouldn't be included in stuff in calls, but that's worked out very well so far. So the RCs are very happy with that. RTCA results have been very, very strong. We have had some differences between the two organizations, but it's been on both sides. It's been mainly related to topology and some solving errors that have been easily resolved, and we're tracking those to make sure we have a good estimation going forward as far as our network apps tools goes. We have had a couple of events too as well. Not 3 hours into it, we had one of the entities run into an EEA2 event. Pete called us right away and said, do you see the data? We saw it. Our numbers matched, and so we're very, very confident in our BA performance measurement so far. We've had a couple repeats of that as well, and it appears that we're tracking that very well, and our tools to monitor that are very strong. We had a potential open loop on COI event that we were down to one line on COI, and the RC saw it. Our data matched with peak. We listened to the plans. We agreed with the plans. The BA, of course, was involved in that at Cure California as well as BPA, and there's some implications as far as protecting for separation of the loop, and we operate to that very well too. So that was a good event to work through, listen to it from an RC perspective in the shadow ops mode, and build confidence in our ability to do that. IRL monitoring, we've had a couple. We have a IRL in Southern California. That's in effect only when we have a planned or forced outage. That was in effect last week, and as part of that, we in our operations planning analysis, we look at hour by hour the margin we have on that operating reliability limit. And normally it was very wide, but towards the end of the day it got narrower, and that's important to the RC because if the load forecast comes in or load comes in heavier than forecasted, or we have another outage, we lose a generator, that margin could shrink. And of course then we'd be very concerned about maintaining that IRL limit and staying under it. So that's worked very well. In fact, our results were very strong on that as well, so we're very confident in that. That was a very good exercise, not only in the day-ahead analysis, but in real time to work through that. GMS messaging system. So we have a GMS messaging system that's our own for the RC West BAs and TOPs. We're offering that in parallel with the RMT messaging system of Peak. So we've been duplicating a lot of messages on that. The BAs and TOPs have been using that within the California BA or California geographic area for the July 1st footprint, and that's been going very well too. Some minor access issues, but we've been able to resolve those pretty quickly. ICCP minor, we've had some minor data issues, just some mapping issues. We get a lot of data that comes into the ICCP, and we map that to displays. We've had a couple mapping issues, but RCs have been identifying them, submitting tickets for them to get fixed, and then the EMS staff have been addressing that as well. So that's been going very well. And now we're getting ready to sort of wrap into moving on to our second phase of this first shadow ops period, where we sort of reverse roles with Peak. Peak will actually sort of go into more of a listening mode. They're gonna, of course, they retain all authority as RC record, but we're going to sort of initiate the discussions with the BAs and TOPs, and Peak will listen in and either take over the conversation if they don't like the way it's going, or agree with what our plan is. So we're getting ready for that for the second phase, and that will start June 1st. We have a similar plan for the second phase of the expanded, or the second period of shadow ops, which will be starting September 1st for the expanded footprint going forward. So that's going very well. We haven't really identified any issues logistically with that. And so I think we're doing pretty well. The RCs are very happy. The guys that are on staff, they seem to be very confident and growing with their ability and their understanding of the system. So that's good. And then our RTWG, so we're a real-time working group, and we're looking at a number of issues going forward here. We've developed a lot of well, first off, we surveyed the north and south area BAs and TOPs for guide identification. Of course, initially we came up with the IRLs and stability guides, and we identified a number of those and have developed them for July 1st, as well as we're looking at the November 1st time frame. So just an example of some of the guides, we have a USF phase shifter coordination guide. We actually developed that with Peak. We drilled on it. Now we'll be modifying that for the second or expanded footprint. We'll be drilling on that with SPP as well. We have a couple IRLs in the Southern California, San Diego, and Vic Lugo. Those won't change going into November 1st, but they're in place. Oregon Export IRL, we developed a guide that's compatible to Peak's guide right now. That will shift and change November 1st, so we're working on that, and I think we're near finalizing that with the impacted entities. Washington Import IRL is another one we're working on, very close to finishing that as well. CASI WEC Open Loop, N-1-1 for Nevada stability, Northwest Nevada stability. We're working on that with Nevada and Peak and BPA, and that's coming along pretty well too. And then also Montana, WAPA, and the Upper Great Plains. We've met with Northwest Energy and WAPA already. We're just in a discussion this morning with Nature Energy regarding that, and we've had some communications with Casey and the staff there and Steve Sanders at WAPA, and we're progressing very well on that too. So we've got another number of potential guides we feel are out there, Colorado, Silver Spring, Kuala Sagaro thermal. There's a thermal guide in that area. Northwest Mexico and Southeast Colorado trends and stability. That's another guide we'll be working on, making sure we have, we feel there's across RC seam impacts there. While the science of the limit is still there, the parties participating in mitigation are going to change a little bit. So we want to make sure we incorporate that into the procedures and guides and for the BAs and TOPs as well. And Hacienda, Mesquite, and Mesquite Raz Thermal are also. We're working on that too. So, Michelle, you have a question.
Yeah, I was just going to say, I think you've named off quite a few guides that you're working on, and that's great to hear about. Would it be possible for you to send a list to the Oversight Committee so that we, I know I didn't capture all of them, so sure. If we could have, that'd be great. Sure,
yeah. So we won't be specific about what's the intent of those IRLs. This is a public forum, but we can mention them in name and what they are. So we're working on that. Also, the RTWG, as a side note, now we're developing criteria. So we've taken care of the high order IRL guides. Now we're looking at sort of the SOL guides that will be specific to a smaller a system operating limit, or maybe a less impactful system operating limit as far as the region perspective goes. So we're working on our criteria as, okay, what thresholds do we have to cross when we feel we need an operating guide that addresses both the RC coordination and BA TOP coordination and the RC at RC West. So make sure that we have clear instructions to our BAs and TOPs and our RC West RCs, as well as an understanding from the BA TOPs is exactly what's expected when we challenge those system operating limits, what the mitigation is, what the actions are going to be. So that's under area we actually meet on that Thursday again. So that's being developed. And then lastly, we've just developed an inter-area oscillation operating guide. So it really is working on the larger inter-area oscillations we can experience here in the West. We have that guide developed. We have it at BPA now for review, and they've done quite a bit of work on that, and that really is involved in synchrophasor and detecting oscillations and the mitigation we'd use to do that. So we're working through that. That's a very sort of a cutting edge guide, I think, as far as the industry goes, and something that both the Eastern interconnection and the Western interconnection are trying to figure out how to manage those oscillations and what they do in those actions. So that's gotten a lot of awareness with the Eastern area event they had in February, I believe. So we'll probably be circulating that past NERC as well to make sure that they are understanding and agree with our actions. So, any questions? Steve.
So Steve Cobb, SRP. So Tim, I know your primary focus from an operational perspective is the California footprint. Have you overlapped into the other areas as of yet, as far as listening in the conversations between Peak and, say, entities in the Southwest or the Northwest?
Not really. But we have, in respect of the Oregon operating or Oregon export IRL, we have. So, but really it's been centered on California. But pretty soon we'll be jumping into that mode. In fact, we'll probably be hearing some of that when we get into the RC record for California, and we're starting shadow ops definitely in September 1st. So,
any surprises or major lessons learned as far as this first launch?
Not really. I mean, I think you know, we've really been confirming our data. And so I think we've been very consistent with what the expectations are and our understanding of the system and the way Peak operates the system. So I think the second phase, when we take the lead, we might have some opportunities there to learn from Peak as well as the BAs and TOPs. So,
thank you.
Yeah, Matt Smeltzer, ID. A couple questions. So starting June 1st, my operators, or everybody's operators that are July 1st customers, contact RC West first, but no action is taken until Peak is on the call, correct?
Well, actually, they'll be still contacting the BAs and TOPs throughout the shadow period. We'll always contact their RC record.
Okay.
That way we ensure that the RC records are involved in all conversations.
Okay.
At that point, then we'll start the conference call, and we'll take over the lead on the conversation part of it.
Okay. So once everybody's on, then RC West will take the lead.
Right. Correct. Correct.
And for the GMS, I know the question's come up before, and I'm not sure if there was an answer yet, but as of July 1st, all the July customers will just put out GMS, and I believe RC West will transfer those to the RMT. What about people that are using the RMT? How is that going to get transposed into the GMS?
So, well, first off, the GMS side, any WEC-wide messages we feel are important, we'll move over to RMT as the RC. If it's something that's just centered in our RC footprint, then we probably won't promote it.
Okay.
To the other side. The other way, we'll talk to, we'll be monitoring RMT as well.
So you're monitoring both? And
we'll be monitoring both, and we'll copy over any events that we feel that our footprint needs to know. So,
thank you.
Yeah. We've got a pretty extensive GMS guide we worked on, and one of our RCs worked with the BAs and TOPs to develop this a guideline for the BAs and TOPs as well as the RCs used during this period and going forward. So, you're welcome.
So actually I have a question for the July 1st customers rather than for CAISO. And we asked CAISO whether they had any lessons learned for us. Do any of the July 1st customers have any lessons learned or observations that you want to share?
The processes are working fairly smoothly. The transition's going well. I think we're ready to sign off that, you know, we're ready for the July 1 date. So, going well so far.
Yeah, Matt Smeltzer, ID. I'm getting very positive feedback. We actually had an event last week that was possibly affected a major 500 kV link. Many companies involved, and there was great communication all around.
Great. And we have a weekly RTWG call, and one of the things we do is we're soliciting for input all the time from our BAs and TOPs about what their experiences are so we can stay ahead of the ball on any problems that develop.
John Nuremberg, Tacoma Power. So, like when there was the near islanding north and south, as Peak winds down, who takes over those maybe things that might have ended up being longer term, like analysis studies? Is that getting handed back to you, or what's that procedure going to look like? Because we've kind of got this weird interim position where they're going to be here for a while, they should own it, but at some point here it has to get handled.
Yeah, and I fully anticipate we'll take over that role as far as any event analysis, identifying any procedures or operating guides that need improvement based on a past event. That's answering your question. Yeah. So.
And then how would that get communicated, I guess?
That'll probably be communicated through our RTWG group, if not, you know, in a closed session of this, if it's a big enough event or a big enough change.
Okay.
We have a procedure process. We take it usually through the RTWG, but if there's any significant material change, there's some change that we couldn't agree on in the RTWG level, we'd raise it up to this committee for direction, not necessarily approval, but direction on how to solve the issue. So I think we've got a pretty strong process going forward, and we're keeping the bulk of the work in the SME's hands that are working with the operating limits or operating guides and procedures as well.
Thank you.
Yeah. Anything else? Okay, thank you.
And I think we have Nancy, are you next? right.
Okay. Good afternoon, everybody. Okay. I'm Nancy Trey-Week, Executive Director of System Operations here at the ISO. I wanted to give you a brief update on where we are with certification so far. July 1, we received our final report from WEC. They sent a letter off to NERC requesting approval from NERC. All the bucket 2 items were completed very quickly, and the certification team did recommend approval. So right now it's at NERC. They will be, WEC and NERC will be coming in again in a couple weeks to just check in on shadow operations. So I would expect that it'll be sometime after that we'll get the final from NERC. And then so for November 1st, our certification package was received on May 1, and we have to have the package into the certification team by June 28th. And so we're working on that right now. We've agreed with the certification team that we'll focus on anything that's changed as we expand the footprint rather than recreate everything again. But we will focus on the changes, and I'm sure it will be a complete package. And then we're expecting a site visit from the certification team end of July, early August. So our date is July 30th for about 3 days. So everything's going as planned, and we're just moving along now. We got done with the first certification, immediately turned around and started working on the second certification. So we're well on our way to have that package to the certification team in the next month. Questions?
Nancy, Steve Cobb, SRP. So how much of the information were you able to carry over from the first cert to the second cert? Is there a lot of redundancy in it, or is it about the same amount or more effort?
There was a lot of redundancy in it, and that's why we requested to focus on the changes. It'll still be a large effort because of just the expansion, but we're able to, utilize a lot of the things we approved over the last, year. That'll all be reused. There's a lot of things, a lot of answers that will be the same, and so that's good. I think that's really good because they're very used to how we're going to handle all the situations. So, other questions on the phone, anybody? No? Okay, thank you very much.
Thanks, Nancy. I think the DD is up next.
Good afternoon. My name is Didi Subakti with California ISOs. I'm currently serve as the Director of Operation Engineering Services here in California ISOs. So in the next few slides here, I would like to talk about moving forward, really, of what's changing for both the impact for both the July 1 customer as well as November 1 customers. Before I go to talk about what EIR is, so maybe I'll just share a little bit what NASB EIR. Some of you are familiar, maybe some of you not, but NASB is really is the NASB, and then the EIR is actually a web-based industry tool, and it's actually what we used to call, there's a long time ago, some of you probably familiar with what the NERC TCN registry, and now they call it an EIR registry. And this is basically a registration platform that connects the BA and the RCs in the whole NASB world. So as expected, when you change RC, then there has to be a registration that's actually moved in this NASB world where you have to change your BA to RC association. So this is true for July 1 customer. This is also true for the November 1 customers when you actually move RCs. A little bit of history, though. Interesting enough, actually, currently, when we moved from WEC, or WSEC or WEC, when we moved from WEC, WSEC to PEAK, we actually did not make the transition. So if you actually look into the EIR registry, or if you actually look at the NASB, there's no one called PEAK. So in the registry itself, it's actually called WECC, and that was actually to be different than the WSCC in there. So in the NASB EIR, it's still called WEC, and there is no AESO, even though they're actually VA, there was actually still WEC. Why is this important for every one of us? Because every one of us who are a BA then actually make a transaction through tagging and whatnot. There is an actual association inside of the tagging itself where you make transactions between BAs, between balancing area. And this association are made at the time of when you create the e-tag. So in other words, when you start making a transaction, that transaction is associated with the RC. So that's the importance here. And how does this impact you all? It will impact you all because this impacts everybody that's doing the tagging. These same presentations, by the way, have been made to many of the schedulers people last week, and today and tomorrow this week, if there's a scheduling committee that is meeting in WEC, my colleagues making the same presentations there too, but we would like to err in the over-communication perspective because this impacts literally everybody in the Western Interconnection that is changing. Here's the plan. We have to have a change, and when we're making the change, we have an objective. We have these 3 objectives that we have evaluated. And this evaluation and objectives actually has been worked out with all the RCs in the Western Interconnections along with the schedulers in there. And really what we want to make sure is whatever change that we do, it had to be moving forward, it had to be a future structure that is sustainable, but we also want to minimize this impact on the change to all the tools and downstream application that you have, that we all have. And that includes some of the shared tools such as ECC, which is used for the unscheduled flow mitigation, WIT, which is used for all the interchange and tagging in the whole Western Interconnection, and we want to make sure that this minimizes impact for each of the RC transitions. So many of you know that we have the July 1 transition, we have the we have the BC Hydro, BCRC transition, we have the SVP transition and whatnot, our November 1 transition. So we want to back to scheduling for each RC transition. So with these 3 objectives in mind, what we have decided is that we want all the RCs planned to register as RC in the EIR. So we would actually do a cleanup of the registrations with the NASB, and we would have Alberta as the registry, BCRC as its own registry, Grid Force, RC West, and SPP West. And then all BA needs to make this change in their RC association from right now PEAK, or really WEC, WECC, to the new RC, whichever RC that you are actually taking the RC services from. As we are making the changes, there's actually 2 options. And option number 1 is we would move the RC association to coincide with the pre-scheduling time horizons. So many of you are aware and familiar with the fact that we have this pre-scheduling, which means that we actually change this tagging and do the tagging ahead of the time instead of the actual day of cutoff. So, it could be day ahead. If it happens in the weekend, we do it in the Friday before, and so on and so forth. Or the option 2, you could actually remove the RC association on the date of record. So for example, for us, if we do it July 1, we'll either do it July 1 or we do it before July 1. So we actually went through this with all the RCs and looking at all the options, and here's actually where each RCs actually land on. The RC West, and the BCRC and Grid Force is looking at the option 1, which basically in the pre-scheduling timeline, and Alberta and SPP West is looking at the RC date of record. So what that means then, the EIR effective date, so this is not the RC effective date from NERC perspective, but this is from the NASB perspective. So RC West effective date for EIR perspective is actually going to be June 28th. And when you look at it, that's because that's the Friday or the last working day before the July 1. And the same things there, if you start looking at that for the RCUS for 11/1, it will be the day before, which is October 31st, which is also a working day before. It's basically the work days before the actual NERC cutover, when you think about that. So because of the actual midnight cutover that all of this stuff, so the times when the new e-texts are linked to the new RC is actually set up in that bottom portions in there. Now this transition has been shared with many of the schedulers, many of your folks, so they're aware of this. My ask is that to make sure that you confirm that you are all ready for these dates. And really, these are the BA actions that I put it in here. So this presentation is made publicly available. So each BA will need to change the RC in their BA entity code role. Somebody actually needs to get in there, and you will actually have to make the actual change. Can be done anytime before, but the effective date will be that effective date that is on the third row based on the RCUS. So for the July 1 customer, my ask is that you will go in there and you will create your BA to be active under RCUS starting on June 28th. And then the same thing for the November 1. You will go in your EIR registration and make your RCUS to be effective on October 31st. So that's the first ask. We will create a step-by-step EIR guide that steps the BA would do that. So that's coming later on, and we'll circulate that with the BA and the schedulers in there. I'm going to stop there first to ask if there is any questions. So basically what the ask is really to get somebody from your BA to go to NASB EIR and work with the NASB EIR to create an effective date of that date that is in that third row. If you have any question, you could contact me, and there is a NASB this NASB lady that actually has been working with us by the name of Caroline Trump as well. So many of your folks know Caroline, and we were able to help as well with regards to this. Any questions?
So, Dee, Steve Cobb again. So I'm going to just speak on behalf of SRP and APS. Thanks for doing this while we're still on the same time with you guys in Arizona.
That was actually, you see that little note in there. Yeah, it's very interesting to do that. So, there's Tony.
This is Brian Pauling with Hetch-Hetchy. The scheduling, if CAISO is your BA, will that automatically happen? Will CAISO BA and RC West automatically do this NASB EIR transition, or do we need to take an action to contact our BA CAISO to make this happen?
For the California ISO's BA, the California ISO scheduler have to do this for themselves. So when I'm talking about this, it also talks to John Phipps to make sure that the California ISO's BA people actually do the same thing. There is no preferential treatment. They have to do it their own too. But we have to make the change because the registration is actually RCW for RC West. So there's actually a new registration in NASB. It does not say California ISO because the California ISO is for the BA. So we in California ISOs, the BA that is managing this would have to link CAISO to RCW.
Indeed, Tony Braun. Practical question. What happens if there's a slip-up somewhere in this? Does the E-tag get kicked out by the...
Right. So the question was, what would happen if somebody slipped up on doing that? In reality, nothing's going to happen. We actually have built a safeguard, and this objective is minimize the impact on the ECC with and other downstream system from NASB EIR changes. What we've done is actually we've worked with OETI to make a safeguard inside the system itself so that the system will be able to actually manage that even there is a slip up. But there's the big but here. But I have the last slide for cleanup that I'm holding off. And we'll talk a little bit more about that later. And it's something to do with really when peak winds down. Any other questions? If not, I'll go back to this portion. So this is where actually the big cliff, I should say. And it's not really a scary cliff, but it is a cliff. What basically Peak needs to decide whether Peak will either actively or passively allow its NASB EIR record to cease. Now, many of you know that Peak is winding down on December 3rd. So in reality, there is no BA associated with Peak after December 3rd. So Peak will have to make a decision whether or not we will carry on that WECC registration in NASB, and who's going to maintain that or manage that. So if all the BA make the decision changes and all those other stuff, clean up the tag and all those other stuff, then there is no need, there will be no tag associated to WECC. So it's fine to just take out WECC. But this is why we need everybody to not only just move that BA change to one of the RC, but also reviewing the potential of ongoing long-term tag or long-term transaction. So, for example, if you actually have action, and this is actually not much of an issue for, well, let's make this hypothetical situations for RC West customer that is coming on November 1. So, for example, if for some reason, I don't know why, but if for some reason on October 30th you created a tag and then the transaction, and that transaction for some reason goes through all the way through January 1st, 2020. That transaction, January 1st, 2020, that tagging is associated with WEC because the association is created at the time of the transactions being created. So if WEC disappear after December 3rd, that tag would basically become kind of like an orphan tag. We would rather like you to actually have no other tag that is associated with WEC if WEC is no longer a registered entity in the EIR. Does that make sense?
So let me make sure that I'm understanding you, Didi. So if we have tags that span our transition date, whether that's July 1 or November, well, probably more to your point, November. And so we as a BA do make the change on October 30th at 2300, but we created any tags before then if Peak ceases, that tag will still have an issue?
The tag would work, everything would be fine. It doesn't impact ACC, but when you look at the tag, it would show that a tag that is associated to a registry that is no longer exists.
So I guess the bottom line question is, are you wanting us to do something with those tags that span our transition date? Right.
So there is a request from NASB and WEX basically to clean up. It's not going to because we built safeguard in the system would work. All the system would work, but it's just going to be there's this orphan tag laying around that still works, but it's orphan. So now most people, if you don't do transactions, if you don't put a tag for 2 months, it's much safer for people who are in California ISOs, or sorry, in the RC West on November 1, because you have, most of the tag that you created on October, if it goes through November, it's still fine because Peak's still there, WEC's still there. If Peaks make a decision that they are going to allow the records to expire on December 31st, so your tags for 2 months is still fine. And I think what we looked at is not a lot of people do tagging for more than 2 months that is in there. So the bottom line is the system, we set up the system so the system can handle it. There is safeguard and everything, but there is an ask to just kind of let's clean up to make sure that there is no unused or orphan record. So So the ask is that if you have a long-term tag, you might want to chunk it out to make sure that when peak let their registration cease to exist on December 3rd, that there's a the new tag is no longer orphaned.
I think you said there was a detailed guide. Are you still working on it? And if you are, when will it be ready and how will it be distributed?
Sure. So what we are currently doing is we actually have an EIR implementation guideline that has been vetted out with OETI, NASB, all the RCs. So that guideline is actually currently today is being talked about in the WEC ESAS, the Interchange Scheduling Subcommittee. So I would like to inform, first of all, that your folks should probably be checking on what's going on in the ESAS. And then once the ESAS, we go through all the ESAS thing, then what we would do is we would mark it final and distribute it for everybody.
Didi, it's John Pitts from the ISOBA. I just want to restate what I think I heard you say then, that after the transition date, each entity should terminate their tag that was associated with the previous RC to ensure that that's the cleaning up that you're wanting, is to terminate any tag so that's no longer active within previous RC.
Not quite.
No?
So the termination is really, the cleaning up that was asked is that if peak, let's just say peak will actively terminate their record on December 3rd. So the ask is that if there is still any tag that is after December 3rd, and that tag was created before July 1 or before November 1, you might want to terminate and redo the tag.
Okay, thank you.
So let me see if I can make that slower. So if you create a tag before you make the change in the RC change, and then that tag then be associated with peak. And when peak cease their registration December 3rd, if that tag still going, the ask is that terminate that tag and create a new tag.
So, Didi, this is Nancy Treweek. Can you go back to the slide that had the chart? So you're asking for people on these times to re-register the EIR with RC West, correct? Is that what you're asking here?
So now let's move back to the BA registration, which is separate from the tagging stuff, right? So thanks for pointing that out. So the first ask is that BA will need to change their RC and BA entity code inside the EIR registration, and you'll actually have to do it. You can actually do it before, but what we want you to put the effective date is not the real RC effective date. You would be putting that effective date, which is the 6/28/2019 or 10/31/2019.
So to the extent that you create your tags, once you have your registry reset, you should be okay.
That's correct.
It's only in the event that you have a tag that may be an older tag that spans multiple months that we may need to go and clean up post-peak wind down.
That's correct.
Right.
So for July 1 customer, and maybe, let's just take an example so that, because this is really very interesting, convoluted stuff. For July 1 customer, if you are in July 1 customer, if you have tag that you created on June 27, which is before June 28, right? If you have created June 27 and that tag for some reasons goes all the way to 2020, you might need to actually recreate that tag on December 3rd when peak goes away. If you are November 1 customers and you create a tag on December 30th, which is before that December 3rd, if you create that on October 30th, and that tag for some reasons goes all the way to 2020, you would need to recreate that tag on December 3rd. Okay? we'll make sure that it's all in the guideline. But I really appreciate the time to just create the awareness of what I'd like you to bring back to your scheduler, especially the pre-scheduling team, and that will be a huge help. Any other questions? Okay, thank you.
All right, Janet Morris is up next.
Thank you. And hello, everyone. I'm Janet Morris. I'm responsible for the Project Management Office in our Technology Division. And I'm here to follow up on a presentation we made last month in April regarding our technology work, and I'm here to report that really nothing's changed since then, which is good news. So you can see the You Are Here star is moved to now the middle of May, so we're about a third of the way through the shadow operations for the July customers, and we're preparing for the integration testing by doing the connectivity training and access validation for the November customers. Our onboarding is also on track. You can see that we've continued to make progress on the July side, and what's remaining is to complete the shadow operations and the executive statement, which Phil will cover later in this meeting. And for the November customers, we're gearing up now for all of those same activities, and just move on to what's remaining on our plates. So we're continuing to work towards these milestones. For 7.1, we are really working to ensure that our systems are stable and continue to provide good data availability for shadow operations. We have released a new system interface for submitting full network model files. That is our RIMS system, and we'll be asking all customers to start submitting full network model files through that system with the next submittal window. And then we're completing still some functional and performance testing, which we hope to do a good 2 weeks before 7.1. For the 11.1 milestone, we have some additional functionality that we're continuing to test in time for the recertification that Nancy outlined. We also are making the necessary changes to our settlement system, and you'll hear more from April about the HANA invoicing and the other invoicing activities. Our settlement system will be ready for those activities to take place. And then finally, we have some RC to RC integration activities that are also underway. Last month, we spoke some of our full network model schedule, and I'm happy to report that our Q2 model is on track for production deployment on Thursday, the 23rd, and into a non-production environment on May 30th. We do have an additional network model promotion planned on July 11th for BPA and SRP and Seattle City Light, and that is on track for production on July 11th with promotion into our non-production environment on June 27th with a SIM export file, the SIM static file export on June 14th. And finally, the Q3 model, which is the last full network model promotion before the start of shadow operations for November customers, will go to production on August 22nd. And the submittal window deadline for that is on May 30th. So we encourage everyone to submit for any network model changes that you have in time for that window. So I'd like to open it up now to any questions you might have. hopefully back on track for agenda purposes.
Thanks, Janet. Next we have Ginger Quintavaya.
Hello, everyone. I'm Ginger Quintavala. I'm the Manager of Customer Experience. This is the first time most of you have probably seen me here. I wanted to cover with you the transition to our long-term support model for customer service. And what I really want to focus on today is moving to the steady state and kind of just highlighting the separation of how you're going to communicate and how all the staff will communicate with the ISO. So I really wanted to separate the two, and I kind of just highlighted the difference between urgent and non-urgent. And just focusing on if you have an issue, if you need to contact us, this is the real delineation. So we're looking at things urgent are reliability based. And obviously something that is urgent, you're not going to send us an email, take your time, you're going to call us. And I've highlighted the 3 areas of a phone call that would be made to us. That would be to our RC West operations desk, either our operations engineer, or directly to our service desk. And I put a note here that we have a new phone number for our service desk. We have a standard services number. We decided to create a service desk number specifically for RC. Purpose in doing that is it gives our service desk staff the ability to use different tools that are RC specific, and they know that right up front. Instead of having to ask every caller if they are RC or not, they can just immediately start using those scripts and that information, so hopefully it'll be a little bit more efficient of a phone call. On the non-urgent side, we have identified things that are help or questions. And help could be something where as you're having trouble submitting an outage, you're not sure how the tool works, you have some questions. Those would fall into that space. We use a ticketing system called City. You may have heard it mentioned. Most people have access to this tool at this point. In using that tool, we use it not just for help questions, we also use it for other things, and allows us to auto route. So if you're submitting a question and it's specific to a certain group, we can auto route that ticket directly to that group so they can answer it a little bit faster. The other thing is knowledge articles. In the City tool, we have a whole section dedicated, and what a knowledge article is comes from 2 sources. One is something we want to share that may be complicated, such as if you're having issues getting access to a system, or your UAs are having trouble provisioning users. There's articles around that walks them right through it. We also use this for frequently asked questions. If we see that we're getting a couple questions, same kind of questions, we'll create a knowledge article. The good thing about these is they have a predictive search. So if someone is asking a question and they're typing in the question, as they're typing it, we're looking to match keywords and popping up the articles. So this should be really helpful for staff that are potentially working off shift, nights and weekends. They may be able to get answers to their questions immediately from some of the knowledge articles we've created. Also gives the ability to follow the updates of the questions and to track them. We also have submitted out through the RC onboarding groups some more details around this, some workflows around this that are available to everybody, but I just wanted to kind of highlight the differences between these 2 at this point.
Hey, Ginger, this is Phil. Can you maybe parse this a little bit for the customers in terms of what does this mean, or what are the differences between the November 1st customers and the July 1st customers in terms of what you just went through?
Absolutely. So this is focused on the July 1st customers at this point. Typically, as we're onboarding, a customer goes through the PMO. I think most of you know Janet, obviously, and Joanna Lai has been doing a lot of the communications while somebody's coming up to shadow operations. Once we've moved into shadow operations, which is where we are obviously, we want to focus on getting everyone familiar with how things are going to operate post-shadow operations. So this is really focused on the July customers while they're in shadow operations, and then obviously when the November customers come in shadow operations, it'll be the exact same model.
Steve Cobb. So do you actually get a human under any circumstances as far as the non-urgent questions, or do you have to wait till normal business hours?
It depends. Typically it's normal business hours, but we can still answer them. If somebody sees it, they will answer them. On our service desk, which is staffed 24/7, they do go answer them. So if it's something they can answer during non-business hours, they will. If it is urgent and you do need something immediately, that's why we recommend a phone call. So if it is something that cannot wait for business hours.
So non-urgent is strictly the ticketing system then?
Yes.
Okay.
questions? All right, thank you.
All right, next we have April Gordon.
Good afternoon, everybody. My name is April Gordon. I'm the Director of Financial Planning and Procurement, and today I'll be going over the billing estimates for the 2020 rate. Before I go through the rate, I wanted to give you a bit of background on the rate development and what's considered to come up with the rate. The RC rate at its foundation is based off of our existing GMC revenue requirement. The revenue requirement consists of 5 different components. The O&M budget, which is by far the largest component, and that entails the personnel budget and non-personnel budget for just regular operations and maintenance. We also have our standing debt service, our cash-funded capital, our other costs and revenues, and our operating cost reserve adjustment. The last 2 components are typically credits to the revenue requirement. All told, that generates our GMC revenue requirement that we need to collect every year going into the next year. For the RC rate, we determined that 9% of our GMC revenue requirement is what we need to collect to cover our expenses. And that was determined by doing a mini cost of service study and submitting that to FERC for approval. The multiplication of the RC percentage generates our RC funding requirement. We take out any minimum charges that would be assessed on tops with no loads, for example, to come up with our net funding requirement, and then we divide that by the megawatt hours going into the next year. That calculation is our RC rate per megawatt hour. What you have in front of you is our revenue requirement and timeline. The timeline that you'll notice has points in the process where our stakeholders can provide input. We're going to kick off the 2020 budget development in July of this year, and that will be a first stakeholder meeting in which we invite stakeholders to come in and weigh in on that process. Between July and October, we'll go ahead and do internal budget process, and then we'll present the draft budget to the Board of Governors in November. At that same time, we'll go ahead and do another stakeholder call where we will elicit feedback from the stakeholders and go over the development of that budget. And then the board will decide what that budget is going to be going into December, and then we'll post the rates at the end of December. The rates that are approved will go into effect January of the next year. What you have in front of you now is the RC billing cycle, and it goes over the responsibilities between the RC customers and the RC and RC West. The RC customers will kick it off by submitting their 2018 net energy for load or net generation megawatt hours into MRIS. We'll turn around and provide an information statement which lists all of the volumes that we've received for review and edits if necessary. That information will be due or released end of October of this year. The RC customer will then validate the volumes, and if they have to make any changes, to do so no later than November 27th this year. And then we'll use the volumes from the informational statement to calculate the RC rate going into January of 2020. January 2nd, we'll go ahead and release the bill for the 2020 annual charges as well as the prorated charges for 2019. And then the payments would be due no later than January 31st of 2020. Are there any questions at this point? Yes.
This is Casey at Northwestern. So our budget process for our utility is submit your expense items, which this would be covered under, in June, and our approval process takes it out to October of the year. Is there a way to get an estimate or some, I know you've got all your process, but it seemed like it was going to be a lot later than when I needed to submit it for approval in our budgets for 2020.
I understand. We can give you an estimate of what we believe the RC rate will be going into 2020. Will that answer your question? Okay. Then I'll go into the next slide. The estimated rate for 2019 for the first period, which is July 1 through 10/31, would be 1.3 cents per megawatt hour. What you would assess that on would be your prorated megawatt hours for 2017. For the second period, which would be November 1st through 12/31, the rate is estimated to be 2.76 cents per megawatt hour, and that would be assessed on the 2017 megawatt hours for your BA. The estimated rate for the 2020 RC service is going to be between 2.8 cents per megawatt hour to 2.9 cents per megawatt hour. The rates themselves will not be finalized until the final footprint going into that year of service is determined. Are there any questions?
John Erbert from Tacoma. Why is the period 2 for the group that's coming in later higher than the period 1?
Okay. Fair question. When we did the rate design, we assessed that we would need 2 periods or 2 different types of services. The first period is for the smaller footprint, the California footprint, and because it is smaller, there's a smaller charge associated with it. As we expand that out to the Western Interconnect footprint, it requires more services, and therefore you have a higher percentage that we need to recoup to cover the cost. The first period is based off of 2%. The second period is based off of 9%.
Okay, I get it. Thank you.
You're welcome. Yes.
This might not be a fair question, but I'll ask it anyway. I know there's been talks of savings and whatnot. How does this compare to the peak RC rate?
I don't have Peak's number with me right now, but I am fairly certain we are at least 50% less.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
This is Seattle. So the 2020 RC rate, will that be based on 2017 load or is it 2018 load?
The 2020 charge would be based off the 2018 net energy load or net generation.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Hey, Stony Braun, would there be possible to maybe have just a follow-up conversation for those that are interested to get into that last derivation, because I think there was an assumption, it's sort of counterintuitive, there was an assumption as the denominator got bigger that actually you were taking a relatively stable fixed cost over a larger period, and so I'm sure that it's correct, but just helpful to maybe understand it by drilling down a little more.
So if I understand correctly, you want to have a side conversation?
Yeah, or,
okay.
Or however is best to handle it.
Okay. As a side note, maybe this addresses your question, we were considering opening up another working group to go over billing and MRIS. That would be a good avenue to have that conversation. Okay. And more information will come around that. So moving off of the RC charges, we're going to go into HANA invoices. And just quick note, for the HANA, we're going to send out the invoices 30 days prior to the kickoff date for the HANA service. The initial invoicing period for 2019 will be September 1 for folks that will be using HANA effective 10/1. The invoices will be available in MRS as well, and the payments are due 21 business days from invoice date. Should any customers want to purchase additional HANA licenses, study user licenses, we would go ahead and invoice that as we go into the year, and we would prorate it. We would actually co-term it to meet your anniversary date. And then the next billing would include all of your licenses. Okay. Are there any questions? All right. Thank you.
All right, Bill is up.
Thank you, Michelle. Good afternoon, everybody. My name is Phil Pettengill, Director for Regional Integration here. And what I wanted to do is just take a couple minutes to remind everybody about the need for the executive statements This first came up earlier when Janet mentioned the readiness criteria and that 8 different points that she had there. The last one was the sign-off for the executive statement. And what I thought I'd do is spend a few minutes with you and then answer any questions you might have. What's important about this is that it was required in the tariff, and it is required in the business practice manual. And the purpose here is for the executive representing your particular company to communicate to us your readiness for a July 1 or a November 1 RC of record change. And so what we're really looking for is to remind you that on May 1, we sent out that notice to all of you on the Oversight Committee. And on May 14th, I'm sorry, thank you, Christina. May 14th, we sent out the signed executive statement from our sponsor, Eric Schmidt. So we've got ours in place, and I'll let you know that we've already got 7 out of 16 entities for the July 1 cutover that have provided us those executive statements, and definitely want to thank you for doing that. But what's important, and really what this statement is doing, is just simply saying that either you feel like your organization has already satisfied that criteria, or you're confident that you can satisfy that criteria by the time we get to June 30th and then cut July 1. And that's really what this is all about. But most importantly, what it does is really just communication between us, that if there are any issues you've identified, or there may be any issues that come up over that 30-day period between May 31st and June 30th, that you can let us know and we can reconcile those and correct those so we can make this smooth transition that we're all trying to achieve. One of the things I wanted to also point out is on this thing here and in our original notice, we've created a new email box. And I know it gets a little confusing when we have all these different ways to communicate with us. But what's important here is this gives you an opportunity to send it directly to RC West-OC, knowing that this is an Oversight Committee activity and something we're asking from you. We're going to keep that email box open over the long run because it'll give us an opportunity to have this kind of direct communication with you as the OC members. So I wanted to highlight that for you. But it is essential that we receive all these by the end of this month, and that's literally only 10 days from now. So I wanted to just highlight this for all of you. Thank you for you that have already submitted those to us. And then note for all of you that are the November 1st customers, this same kind of time frame will come into place about October 1st and in a few months from now. So be looking forward to that. We'll communicate with you as well. We'll go through this same process. We'll send out a notice to you. Eric will sign our readiness for that November cutover, and then we'll look for all of you to respond to us back on that 1st of October. So that's really all I had. Let me stop there and just see what kind of questions you may have. Okay. Michelle, I'll hand it back to you.
All right. Thanks, Phil. So the next discussion that we have on the agenda is to look at a possible rejuvenation by WEC of its RC operating committee. So this has been a conversation at the WEC OC, whether they should have a committee at WEC that looks at all of the RCs. This is something that they had back when WEC became an RC, or it was prior to that, I think.
Yeah. I think it was prior that we had the multiple RCs when they had the committee formed.
Yeah, so there's been this discussion at WEC, and we just wanted to bring that to this group and see if there was a perspective of the RC West Oversight Committee on whether that is something that would be useful, and also to ask that for those of you that do have WEC OC members, to make sure that you are communicating consistent company perspective between this OC and that OC. Any thoughts on this?
Michelle, this is Brian Pauling. Do we have a charter or document of what the WEC RC Operating Committee would govern or review?
So as I understand it, WEC is in the very preliminary stages of even having this conversation. So no, I don't believe there is a charter. I believe that WEC is on the line. Christine, if you can tell them how to join.
Yeah, so Tammy Austin, I see that you're logged in. So if you can press #2 to raise your hand, that way the operator knows to open up your phone line. Noreen,
Hi,
you're in the queue.
Hi, this is Tammy.
Go ahead, Tammy.
Hi. So Steve called. He wasn't able to make the phone call, but he wanted me to make sure, and Michelle kind of covered it. The OC is considering an RC stakeholder group, but it's in the really preliminary stages right now. They don't have a charter or anything like that. They're just merely talking about it. And in all reality, it probably won't even be stood up until probably 2020. So it's real early. There's nothing happening yet. It's really just discussion. And Steve wanted me to make sure that he communicated that.
Tammy, is there a high-level statement? I understand there's not a charter, but can you describe what the purpose and scope of the committee would be?
You know, I don't actually have that. Steve didn't communicate that to me necessarily, but I think it's just the OC committee wanting to get together to kind of have future working groups on this, and not to duplicate the work that this group is doing that on this phone call, but you know, I just don't have a scope of work or anything like that. I know they're just talking about it, and that's it. I can get a statement from Steve, and maybe in the next meeting he could bring that to you. Will that work?
I think so. I think there's some other comments in the room, too.
So this is Steve Cobb. Some of the folks in this room may attend the OC meetings and may have some insights to those discussions. But has there been, I think Michelle touched on it when she was teeing this issue up, has there been discussion between the OC reps and the folks that may be representing their companies at RC West about the usefulness of that committee or subcommittee of the OC?
I don't have any information on that. That's something that Steve could speak to, but if there's someone else in the room that's part of that committee, they probably have some insight to that.
Does anybody have any insight on that? Ben? Okay.
Well, let me just say, this is Nancy Treyweek, and I am part of the OC, WEC OC, and it has been brought up a couple times. I feel like I should be neutral in all of this, but I'll tell you what has been said. I think there was concern, certainly early on, you know, about SEAMS issues and RCs working together and making sure that was happening properly. That got brought up probably over a year ago. And I haven't really heard much about it since, but certainly some of the OC members at that time felt very, you know, it was important to them that WEC play a role within kind of this multiple RC construct within the West.
So, Nancy, based on that, have you heard any comments from NERC as far as any kind of oversight, or do they believe that their structure is oversight enough?
I haven't heard any comments from NERC on that.
Okay, thank you.
Go ahead, Jim.
Jim Shelly with Bank. A little context here. I got a call from Isaac, I don't know, a couple months ago, who's the OC chair, and asking whether the RCTCG, the coordination group, intended to continue to have a role after the end of this year, which I strongly indicated that we did not intend to have a role after the end of this year, that we viewed our role as being in transition. The comment that came back was, well, there was a feeling that there needed to be continued facilitation and coordination between the RCs, and that perhaps this committee might provide that role. So at least that's one of the contexts I had some feedback and discussion with Rich. And I think I asked for this on the agenda because I'm just trying to get a sense on, you know, we as customers, do we feel a need for that? And I guess maybe I'd ask the RC West what their feelings are as to whether they feel a need for ongoing facilitation, coordination from WEC or other entities. I think that's what's on the table.
Just as context as well, the RCs do all participate in the NERC Operating Reliability Subcommittee, which is a committee of all of the RCs, East and West. And so there is that structure. But to Jim's point, I guess, does RC West feel that there's a need for a Western-specific group under WEC to take a look at some of those themes issues as well.
Thank you. So I think for us, we said we would be open to it if that's what people really wanted, but I wanted to point out that we are working on, shared tools and shared services in kind, and each one of those has a construct of an executive committee as well as a working group, which actually have already, like the ECC working group, that kind of stuff's already started from way back to transition over. So there is perspective of the executive leaders of the RCs to come together and work through issues in several of our already shared entities. That, in my mind, wouldn't be under WEC. It would be kind of like what we're doing now, joint RC to RC communication. But again, if WEC customers felt like this was critical, we don't want to interfere with that.
So I guess what I'm hearing is that for the RCs, there exists a mechanism for RC to RC communication coordination. It sounds as though the WEC proposal would be broader in that it would include BAs and TOPs and probably be open, I would assume, under the WEC open meeting policy. So is there a desire to have a forum like that? Casey?
Yeah, I'll just make a comment based on my experience with the 3 RCs that we had in the past. And for those of us on the seams of some of these RC to RC discussions, it never really rose to be a problem until there was a dispute between RCs about, a directive, for example, in the old days. A directive was given and it impacted another RC, or the other RC didn't agree that the directive should be given. We had a forum, so to speak, in the past, and we could go to WEC and WEC could review it, and the BAs and the TOPs could feed into it, those of us that were involved, and then they would make a decision or come to some kind of an agreement between the RCs about what happened and what should happen going forward. That's the only place I see that we would have it, because you can work together on if everything's good, but when something goes sideways, that's where we had issues in the past with the PNSC and Rocky Desert and California. So I just say that as historical issues.
So, Steve Cobb again, I would assume that once the RCs are at full strength, up and running after the first of next year, that the RCs would be bringing that kind of dialogue back to groups like this one, the Oversight Committee, and discussing them there. Casey, I see what you mean as far as being an arbitrator, if you will, potentially, but I'm just wondering if we need to cross that bridge before we need to cross that bridge. So,
this is John Phipps over here from the California ISOBA. I don't know that I would say there's a need for this WEC RC Operating Committee, but I do think a metric that is common across all RCs would be a good thing for the members to be able to measure all the RCs with an equal measuring stick, and that be brought back to the OC. The only other reason I could see for having this committee might be if there are movements between RCs in the future, that there is a committee that can address an entity leaving one RC and going to another RC and bringing that back to the members.
John Nemmer, Tacoma. I guess my only thought is that we can always build ad hoc groups off the OC committee at WEC, and so we don't have to have a standing group when most of the time the work is getting done. We're happy with the work that's getting done, and only when we do have things, you already have an OC group. You can already bring it to there, and then we can build whatever ad hoc teams, because it may be specific between a region or area, but we can make people aware there, see if they want to participate in that, and then the right people are on, can be put on the committee to look at any little project that comes out of it.
Yeah, and I appreciate that. I wasn't advocating that we have this. I was just stating that in the past, when we had multiple RCs, issues would arise, and even with an RC West Advisory Committee, we can bring it back to here, but we can't arbitrate. If we all agree with what was done, and their advisory group all agrees what they had done, where do we take it? What do we do with it? And how does it get adjudicated? So I was just saying that that's an option, and yours is another option. So I'm just saying we don't know what we don't know right now, and how that's going to play out and what's going to happen. But I think that's probably a concern that's coming up at the OC is what do we do if there's a dispute between RCs, and where does it go and how is it handled?
And I think that's an interesting point, Casey. But I think we would also, if we did that, we would also need to think about even how those decisions would be made, given that the RC West footprint is a significant majority of the interconnection. If there was any voting or anything like that, then RC West, assuming there was alignment within the RC footprint, RC West would win. So if the point is to have true arbitration, we would need to think about how we could really structure that.
Yeah, I would agree. And I think, you know, there's always the changes between people leaving an RC and joining another. RC changes have been going on for a long time. So as we transition to the multiple ones, again, I don't think we need to have it right now, but I think having it in our thought process as we go forward would be good, because I know there's going to be times set up there was in the past, and for us on the SEAM side, that's where it generally comes up as a decision to do something that affects the SEAM itself. And we're going to be having a SEAM ourselves with 2 different RCs, so.
Tim, did you want to say something?
Yeah, one thing Tim Beach here from California, RC West. One thing to make you aware of that on the NERC ORS, all the RCs are involved in that, as well as WEC. WEC has a city member, Tim Reynolds, sits on that as well. So it would be sort of a natural extension of that committee to have a subcommittee off that to have these type of discussions as far as coordination goes. So just something to be aware of.
Any last thoughts or comments? So I guess just to summarize, go ahead.
Sorry, it's Tammy, and this is really great information. I'm just going to share this with Steve when he comes back into the office. But I think you all know that WEC also has an RC forum, which is a little different. We're really using that as a communication platform for all the transitions going on. And in fact, we actually have one next week on May 29th. We just don't make any decisions in that, and we don't have like a cutoff date when we will not have RC forums anymore. It's kind of based on this conversation is when we don't need them anymore, we won't have them anymore. So it seems like everyone is calling into those calls to get information, but it really is just kind of an information sharing platform and not a decision-making platform. So it's just another WEC group that's talking about RCs, but I don't believe that we're duplicating the efforts rather than just sharing the information in that particular setting. So just wanted to throw that out there.
Thanks, Tammy. So I'm not hearing a lot of excitement in this room for the creation of this sort of committee. Ultimately, I think it'll be a decision of the WEC OC, and so I encourage you all to share some of the conversation from today with your WEC OC reps. I know that there is a WEC OC meeting in June, so I don't know if it'll be discussed at that point, and I think that if there's not a lot of interest in this room, I imagine there may not be a lot of interest in that room as well. And so I think we can move on from that discussion. All right. So agenda items for the next public session on June 18th of 2019, which is a webinar only. And I know one of the topics that I talked with Phil a little bit about is to talk about some of the ongoing work groups that may exist past Go Live. I think that when we first approved the OC charter, there were a number of work groups or subgroups that were identified in a diagram, but we haven't had a lot of discussion about whether those were the appropriate committees, what their scope and purpose might be, frequency of meetings, things like that. So I asked for the CAISO to have some of that discussion internally first, and then based on their recommendation, then we can have that conversation as a committee at the next meeting. Are there other topics for the public session that you would like to discuss next time? I do hope we'll get another shadow operations update. I think that was very useful, and you guys will be the lead RC by that point for the July customers, so that would be great. Otherwise, we'll, I guess, continue to see how things are moving along and see what other topics may come up. If there are other topics that come to your mind throughout the month, you can always email Steve and myself, and we can talk about getting those on the agenda as well. So next on the agenda then is public comment. Are there any public comments anyone would like to make?
So in the room, if you have a public comment, you're welcome to just come up to the microphone in the middle of the room there and just start by introducing yourself. Anyone on the phone that has a comment, go ahead and raise your hand by pressing #2. So Noreen, let me know if anybody enters the queue, please.
We don't have anyone right now.
All right. Well, it sounds like there's no public comment. One last thing I forgot I was also going to mention, the October 23rd meeting, I understand there's a conflict for many of the RC West and CAISO folks that there is an RC to RC coordination meeting at the same time. And so it was a question of whether we could move this meeting to the morning on October 23rd. Is there any concern with that? All right, we'll go ahead and get that meeting moved then.
So, Michelle, one thing we'll have to check for is against our stakeholder meeting calendar, just to make sure there's no conflicts, since this is a public meeting. So I'll get back to you then.
Okay, so CAISO will double check that, and if there's no conflicts, then you'll go ahead and just update the invite.
Christina, it was a webinar.
Yes.
On the 23rd.
What's that?
It was a webinar. It wasn't
Okay. So that should be easy. I'll check.
All right, so just in terms of the action items that I captured, one was that Tim would send a list of the operating guides out so that we can see what they're working on there. There would be a side conversation looking at period 1 and period 2 billing, and then the CAISO will check on the October meeting and send an updated meeting invite for that. Oh, and Dee Dee will send out the guide for the EIR.
You're not letting me off the hook, man.
I almost forgot, Dee Dee, sorry. Any other action items? All right, so I think then we'll go ahead and go into the closed session. So, Christina, if you want to give directions.
Yeah, actually, Michelle, do you want to wait till 2:30? That's what we have on the calendar in case we have members that couldn't join till the public. Up to you.
I guess I'm going to look around the room. I think probably in the room everyone was just going to stay here. Is there anyone on the phone that is or in the room that's expecting anyone else to join by phone for that closed session? I think we're probably the same people, so I think we'll be okay.
Okay, so we'll just wait for the stakeholders to leave the room.
I would
so members who are on the phone, just
a bio break.
Yeah, we'll go ahead and take a 10-minute break anyway while we're letting the public leave the room, and we'll come back at 2:20.
Great, and so the members that are on the phone, just go ahead and stay on the line, and we'll continue the discussion at 2:20. So Noreen, you can close the web conference portion, please, and also disconnect the participant line.